us about you, your firm, and a bit of background of what you guys do in your firm.
Yep. So our firm is called Lambourne Partners. We're located in Newcastle, New South Wales. We have 3 arms to our business. We have an accounting practice, we have a mortgage broking, and we also have a financial planning business. And each of those 3 businesses all use offshore staff to help support the Australian staff.
Okay, good. And how long have you been doing offshoring?
Yes, we're coming up to our 9th anniversary. So 9 years this October has been the time frame that we've been working with staff in frontline.
How big is your team now? Are you okay to disclose that?
Our team here in Manila is 10 staff, work directly with our 3 businesses, and then we also have 1 staff member who works directly for one of our clients.
And why did you choose to hire staff offshore initially in 2015?
Yes, we came to the Philippines to get an understanding. It was very new at that point of time, offshore staff. The main reason was capacity. In Australia, we were having difficulty in the mid-range staff levels of firstly finding good staff, but then it was more around once we spent a lot of time training those junior staff up to intermediate staff, that seemed to be the time when we'd have a turnover of staff. So that was frustrating. We'd put a lot of time and resources into training staff up from trainees. They'd work for us for 3 to 5 years, and then we'd find that they would want to do something different. We had staff that wanted to move to capital cities. We had another staff member that wanted to become a policeman, or they decided they didn't want to do accounting anymore. So the time, the resources, and that turnover of staff was frustrating because they were working with our clients, and then the clients would see a change of staff, and it was really important to us to have consistency for our clients. So that turnover, but also having capacity. So capacity and having consistent staff were probably the main reasons that we started looking at it about 10 years ago.
What was your main resource to go ahead and make a decision at the end?
So we looked at it for a year or 2 before we actually did it, and we came across an Australian-based provider who was actually doing tours. And so my partner Jason and I came to Manila on a tour, and they took us to about 5 or 6 different providers, all slightly different. We went to one that was up at Clark, and we realised it was too difficult to get to, more flights. There was some bigger providers, some similar to Frontline, but it was really just probably the link to some Australian chartered accountants. And once we met them, we did synergies that we found we were able to communicate very well with at least John, and that worked well for our business.
So you chose Frontline basically because of the connection that it's run by chartered accountants for accountants, and you got along with how the management runs things and all that. Why do you think that is important in terms of this type of partnership, an offshore partnership?
It was important for our firm because we needed to be able to talk to the owners. We needed to be able to discuss any concerns we had with them. We wanted to make sure that at that time as well, the size was different. It was a much smaller firm, so we thought that was going to be suitable for us at that stage, and really now it's no different. Before, when there was 30 or 40 staff compared to 700 or 800, I wouldn't say it's probably even better now, because there's more frontline support, admin, I guess, that are employed by Frontline that work closely with us. So initially, we thought a smaller firm, we'd be a bigger business, a more important client. But now that it's much bigger, really no different. The service is as good as always, but it was important in that respect.
In terms of challenges, what was your initial challenge that you had to overcome when you were starting out with your first staff, if there were any?
There's always challenges, whether you're in business and in accounting practice, there's always challenges. There's always challenges with staff. Probably one of the first ones was getting used to the systems, because setting up the systems, setting up the communication, getting buy-in from our Australian staff. It was important to us to make sure that they were, from a culture perspective, they were a part of our team. So we brought the Manila staff to Australia, and that really made a big difference for our Australian staff. We also brought Australian staff and managers out to Manila. So they got to see the staff, the environment. Manila staff are part of the whole Lambourne Partners team. So that was very important. But setting up the systems, changing the way we were doing it, making sure that we had from early days a mentor staff that communicated daily. So obviously the partners don't have the capacity. So we made sure our managers, we made sure that they had the buy-in and that they communicated regularly, daily with the Manila staff and engaged that way. So that was probably a different challenge, but then just changing systems internally to work and having offshore staff. But I guess I'd say most Australian businesses would have those systems. They've worked from home through COVID, so it's probably easier now for an Australian business that doesn't have offshore staff to do the offshore staff because of what COVID's taught us all and all of our businesses.
What was the core or like the proper reason behind that? Because I know there will be firms that would always be taken aback because they don't want to deal with cultural differences, right? What was your main purpose in really driving that as a factor in making this setup work?
If we're going to spend the time and the effort to have offshore staff, then we had to make it work. So that was probably the driving force behind getting the cultural to work within our business, and it was important to us to make sure that they were a part of our team, because it wasn't going to succeed 10 years down the track if we didn't get that buy-in from our Australian staff, from the partners in our businesses, and also from our Manila staff. So we've, I guess, worked very hard at it, and that's why I come here twice a year. It's difficult because I'm time poor, but if we don't it's no different to having Australian staff. If you have an Australian staff member and you put them in the corner and you talk to them once a month, they're never going to grow, they're never going to prosper, they're never going to succeed. So it's not different if they're in Manila or if they're in your office in Australia. You just got to put time and effort into them. So, the Manila staff is an important part of our practice because it gives us capacity. We've got some long-term staff that are fantastic, and they're an important part of our business.
So you still have your pioneer member, JB, and along the way, you invested in training her up. How did you come about the decision of, I want to put in more time, of course, money as well, to train my offshore team member?
Our offshore staff aren't any different to our onshore staff. The more skills that we can build in our accounting staff, whether they're in Australia, I think what people have got to get past is they're offshore staff. They're just staff. It's no different whether they're sitting in a seat in Manila, in Bathurst, in wherever. If you put the resources to train your staff up, they're going to be better staff. They're going to be able to service your clients better. They're going to be able to grow your practice and do a better job. So we haven't done anything special. We've just trained, for instance, Jenny, who's our manager in the Philippines, exactly the same way that we've trained up our Australian staff. So, for instance, this morning we had technical training in Australia. Our staff in Manila dialed in. I dialed in as well, really just to get the experience, making sure was it clear, and I've learned from dialing in today to improve on that. But so our staff in Manila, they dialed in remotely, but we had staff in Australia that were working from home today that dialed into the technical session. So all of our Manila staff, they dial into we bring in an external provider that does tax training. So they dial in for that. They attend also our monthly technical sessions, but there's nothing different. I guess it's really the Australian accounting firm's understanding. It's exactly the same. You're training just as you would an Australian staff member. If you invest the time, the effort, then you'll get the rewards. The staff will get the rewards and you'll get happy long-term staff.
With your offshore staff, did you ever see it as a hindrance or a challenge for training an offshore staff because their background is
was that they provided initial training. So our first two staff did the 2 or 3 months of training, and that actually built a base of tax training. So they both had the accounting skills. They could do journal entries. They understood a balance sheet. They could read a profit and loss. So it was really just building on the tax. But they also had crossover experience where you've got the VAT tax, which is similar to GST. So they understood it was a government tax, it added on, and it was paid to the government at some point in the future. So having frontline train the staff up, being able to communicate to them as well, not just in English but also in Tagalog, that was important because it helped cross the communication barrier. Initially, we were unsure how it was going to go, but it was very smooth and seamless. So by the time they came out, those staff had already had that experience, and they were at a level higher than what we put on as trainees. They were at intermediate level. But what's happened now is once you've got a couple of 1 or 2 initial staff, we've never done the training again from frontline. So our existing staff have trained up any new staff. So it sort of self-perpetuates from that point on, but very easy to do. So I guess our experience has been easier than putting on Australian trainee staff because they started with a good level. Having that strong accounting knowledge, because some of the staff we put on have had 5-10 years of accounting experience. They're CPA level, and they just don't have the Australian tax, but they pick it up very quickly. Probably Australian accounting firms need to understand that the skill level in the Philippines, that might be a third world economic country, but they're very, very smart, very skilled people, and there's a big workforce here. So you're really missing out if you don't consider it and give capacity to have staff over here and to be able to respond quickly. So we have too many staff. We make sure we have too many staff in the Philippines because if I can respond quickly, if I get an inquiry from a client, it might be simple. I need a payment slip to pay my tax bill. It might be I need the financials for the bank. I need the financials for my broker. We're able to respond really quickly, because I'll just flick the email across to my staff in Manila, and they will readjust what they're doing. I'll get responses back, and we get feedback from third-party providers that we deal with all the time about how responsive we are, and that just creates good relationships with all these other people, and the clients see it. And the feedback is we just we don't get this response from other accounting firms, so we become a preferred supplier. Our clients can see we're doing a great job, and all of these other banks and other institutions, they want to deal with our practice because of how responsive, and we make their job easy. So if you're an accounting firm in Australia and you're not responding in this way, well, you're not going to, you're putting yourself behind how other firms like ours, how we're responding. So that's, so if you think about it, when those providers, if they have a referral source, if they've got a business that isn't happy with their accountant, they're going to go, well, we're dealing with these other firms and they're efficient and they're quick and they respond to us. This is a great firm. If I'm going to put my name on and recommend it, well, I'm going to pick those firms rather than the accounting firm that takes a week to get back to me for something that I require. So that could be another reason if they want to grow their businesses in Australia, well, having offshore staff allow that to occur.
That's good. To close, if someone that's starting offshoring right now and with all your learnings through the 9 years, and they would ask, what's the one thing that they need to focus on when they decide to start?
Probably the most important thing is, there's lots of important things, but I think cultural. You've got to get cultural fit. I think that's really important, getting cultural fit with your Australian team. We've seen it. We've seen a number of firms that have used Frontline that no longer use it. And because there was a gap. There was the Australian team and there was the Manila team. It's one business. They didn't get it. And coming over here, the time and the effort and the cost, it's all a part of making it work. So the key would be make them a part of the team. Consider bringing them out, bringing your Philippine staff to Australia, bring your Australian staff to the Philippines so that they realise that the staff in the Philippines are important. And the Australian staff, need to understand this is actually good for them. So we got that early engagement with our Australian staff, so they understood that we've got support staff in the Philippines that are happy to do any job. So if this makes the Australian staff able to offload jobs that they see as menial or not that important, or it frees them up to be able to do other high level or interesting work, the Manila staff are happy to do all of those jobs. For instance, we took on a staff member early on and they had spent 5 years at their last employer and their main job was reconciling credit cards. All they did for 5 years was reconciling credit cards of that business. There's no way an Australian staff member would do that for 5 years. They'd be lucky to do it for 5 weeks. But that's the dedication that the Manila staff have, and they're happy to do that. So if they have enough challenging roles, then the Australian staff can do the jobs and the work that they find interesting and worthwhile. So it's that understanding. The Australian staff can say the Manila staff are going to provide them with improvements to their role. They're going to be a great support and a part of the team. It's a communication across the board. So to me, that's cultural. It's probably not just culture, it's communicate. If I said communication and cultural fit, that's probably the key. But at the end of the day, if you don't make the effort and the time to make it work, then it's probably not the fit. And it's probably a good thing because that provides more clients for our firm.